just to sort of reiterate what I'm going to be covering today, it's pretty much just going to be a run through of Blender and showing specific features of Blender from a total beginner's perspective, specifically for modeling things that you would ultimately build somehow. So there's a lot of features. Blender's primarily for 3D graphics. There's a lot of features in it that are not really useful for us. Stuff around lighting and shading and animation. So it's a really big, complex piece of software. It's still big and complex, just the subset that we're going to be looking at. But I'm going to try to sort of give a slightly opinionated primer on how to just get started building stuff. So before we jump in, I wanted to just go through a couple preferences that you might want to know about. So I'm generally a big fan of just leaving key bindings and things like that as defaults, but depending on sort of your mouse preferences and whether you have a normal mouse with a middle wheel and a scroll, there are some settings that you might want to change. So the two main ones, one is emulate 3-button mouse. So Blender uses scroll wheel as well as like a middle button click and drag extensively. So if you don't have a middle mouse button, or if you're using a trackpad, it'll be a little more difficult for you. But if you want to emulate a 3-button mouse, then you can use the setting to use Alt left instead of middle. And then the other one is emulate numpad. So this is, most laptops don't have a numpad, and there's some nice sort of view shortcuts that generally only work with the number pad. So I enable emulate numpad so that you can just use the number keys along the top. Other than that, I don't change any of the default settings. Actually, I changed one for my trackball because I don't really have a middle click, but if you have a scroll, then you don't need to do that. So that's sort of just the only setting I would recommend changing or think about changing. And then when you do that, then click Save User Settings, and then next time you start up Blender, it'll remember what you just did. Most of the things on the screen we don't really need, especially the stuff on the right. We'll get to some of that later, but generally we're going to be doing most of our work in the main 3D view section, as well as some of these menus down here. So I'll get to those as we go, but I'm not going to be going through and explaining each and every little button and widget in Blender, because that's not particularly good use of time. So the first thing to sort of have a good mental model of when you're starting with 3D is the coordinate system. So they make it really easy by in the bottom left-hand corner of the 3D view showing X, Y, and Z. So you can see where so the positive Z is up, positive Y is this green arrow, and X is the red one. The way you rotate is by holding the middle mouse button and then dragging around. So then it's going to be rotating about the center of what you're looking at. So rotation is hold down middle mouse and drag. Panning is hold down Shift and do the same thing. So that lets you Shift middle mouse button, drag around, and then the zoom is either the scroll wheel or Control and the middle mouse button and drag. So those are sort of the three main navigation functions that are important to remember. So middle mouse is move around, Shift middle mouse is drag, and scroll or Control middle mouse is zoom. There's also those numpad shortcuts I talked about before. That the three ones that are good to know are numpad 1 is the front view. So you can see if you press number 1, it'll show front perspective, and we'll get to what that means in a second, but we're basically looking straight down the y-axis now. If you press 3, then you're looking from the right, so straight down the x-axis, and then 7 is straight from the top. So those numbers seem kind of arbitrary. If it were on a numpad, it would feel a little bit more natural. But those are sort of nice shortcuts when you want to jump to a specific fixed viewpoint. And then finally, the last thing is, so you notice that it says persp, which means perspective here. So basically what that means is that it's rendering this 3D view like an eye or a camera would, where things that are farther away look smaller. That's generally what looks most natural to us, but a lot of times when you're doing 3D modeling, it makes more sense to switch to what's called an orthographic view, which regardless of how far away something is, it's the same size. So that way, if there are two circles that are, one is floating above the other, and you look at them head on, you want them to be perfectly lined up. You don't want the bigger one, or the closer one to look bigger or anything like that. So if you press 5, that'll toggle between orthographic and perspective. So you can kind of, if you toggle back and forth, you sort of get the sense of what it's doing. So generally, I usually stay in orthographic when I'm doing modeling, and then I'll switch into perspective just to sort of see what it looks like more realistically. So that's the basic navigation. That's most of what you need to know to move around a scene or the object that you're modeling. Then now we're going to sort of get into the actual manipulation with meshes. So this is so in the default scene, you see there's a couple objects. There's this cube, there's this light here, and there's this camera. So you can see those are also in this right outline view. So these are just what are present in the default scene. We obviously don't really care about the camera or the lamp, so you could delete them if you want. I'm just going to leave them there. When you're in the, if you want to select an object in the main 3D view, you might, Blender's kind of weird because it uses right click for select. So if you left click, it just moves this little 3D cursor around, which is useful for more advanced things, but generally it's kind of awkward at first that the left mouse button is kind of pointless for most of your interaction with Blender. So right click will select in the 3D view. So if we select this object, we can move it around. So if you select an object and click on the one of these axes, you can move it constrained to the X, Y, or Z axis. If you click in the middle, so again, that's right click in the middle. You can move it more free. But keep in mind that right now we're just moving the object as a whole. So you can't, when you're doing that, you can't really manipulate this cube beyond just the simple transformations. So that's not that useful to us. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to go into a different mode. So right now we're in a mode called object mode down here at the bottom, which basically means you can select different objects, you can move them around, you can rotate them, but you're really limited as far as more advanced modifications because this is more of a general purpose mode. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to select, again by right clicking on the cube, and then we're going to go into edit mode. So there's two ways of doing that. One is down here. So edit mode is the only other of these modes that we're going to be using. So you can click on edit mode, or you can also use tab to toggle between object mode and edit mode. So now that we're in edit mode, you see it looks a little bit different. If you zoom in and click right, so again, right click to select, you see you can actually select individual points on the cube. So that's pretty cool. So now we're getting a little bit closer to ultimately what we're trying to do. So again, right click is how you select. If you want to, so right now we're selecting vertices. So the vertices are the points that are the most fundamental part of a mesh object. So this is a mesh object. Everything that we're going to be building in 3D is a mesh. They're constructed of vertices, edges. So an edge is a connection between two vertices. So you can see this edge here as just this straight line, and then a face is, each of the faces of this cube is a face. So it's defined by, it's a polygon basically. So there's no curves or anything like that in a mesh. Everything is just vertices, edges between them, and then faces made up bounded by edges. So right now we're selecting vertices. We can select edges by, or we can select multiple vertices by holding down Shift. So this is similar to like other programs like a file manager. Hold down Shift, and then if you right-click to select, you can select additional points. So that's, you're going to be using that a lot. Once you have a pointer, multiple points selected, you can move them around just like we could move around the whole object, just by the same click and drag thing. Control Z does undo. But a lot of times, especially with more complex shapes, it's kind of a pain to select all the individual vertices. If you want to, let's say move this whole face up, it's a pain to select all four, and then you see once you select the fourth, it highlights the whole face, and then you can move it up and down. But that's kind of annoying. So there's different ways of selecting instead of just the vertices, and down here you can actually change from vertex select, edge select, or face select. So if you go into edge select, for instance, and then you instead of right-clicking on a point, you right-click on one of the edges, and you see the whole edge get selected. And then you can do all the same manipulations, but on the edge as a whole. Likewise, for face select, when you go into face select, you can actually see these little dots appear on the faces to show you that that's what you're selecting, and you can just select a whole face and move those around. So now we have kind of a weird-looking cube. Something that's important to note here is when dealing, with meshes is that it's possible to have like an unrealistic face or a non-planar face. So, like, take this example. Like, I'm going to make it really, yeah. So here, this face is technically not a polygon because not all four of these points. So I'll select it so it's easier to see. So this face is not what's called coplanar. So this face does not lie in a single plane. So there's actually like a curve to the face, which makes it look kind of weird as you rotate it. That's perfectly okay. Blender doesn't have a problem with non-coplanar faces. But if you're doing manipulation of individual vertices, it's easy to get that to happen, and then it might be kind of, that might not be what you expect. Obviously, you can't actually 3D print this. You would need to, or do anything like that, you would need to tell it how to actually translate this into a real curve, if that's what you want, or something like that. So just something to keep in mind, that these faces, if it has more than three, if it's a triangle, then it'll always be coplanar, but if it's not, then you might get yourself into a state like that. So we've been messing with the cube because that's the default object. But there's other primitives. So what we're going to do is we're going to clear all this. So we're going to stay pretty much for the rest of this this session. We're going to be staying in edit mode the whole time. We're not going to be. We're just going to be modifying a single mesh object by adding and removing points and faces and edges to it. So I'm going to select all of the faces, basically select everything by pressing A. So first, when you press it once, if you have something selected, it'll deselect everything, and then you press it again, it'll select everything. So A toggles between select all and select nothing. So that's so we select everything, and then I want to just get rid of this. So I'm going to press X, and X brings up a delete menu. And I meant to do it beforehand, but I'll print out these cheat sheets that I wrote up of all the commands or all the keyboard shortcuts that I've mentioned so far. So you have them sort of all in one place. There's other resources online, but I kind of abridged it to be just the ones that I use. So from this delete menu, which is brought up with X, there's a lot of options of what to delete, which is kind of weird and takes some getting used to. Generally, so if you're selecting everything, it really doesn't matter. Pretty much any of these will do what you want. But you'll play around and sort of get this feel of what the different deletes do. Right now, we're just going to say delete vertices because that'll implicitly delete all of the edges and faces as well. So do that, and we're left with nothing, which is what we wanted. Um, so um, so now we're gonna add another primitive. So I mentioned the cube is one primitive. So if you go down to add, you can see the other mesh primitives that come in Blender. So sort of everything you would expect: a plane, a cube, circle, two different kinds of spheres, and then some more advanced ones. So monkey is their mascot, so they include that one as well. But we're gonna just add a plane right now. So plane is just a two-dimensional, it's a single face with 4 vertices and 4 edges. And we're going to start building a model just off of a plane. So generally what you'll do is you'll start with a primitive of some sort and you'll manipulate it by adding additional vertices or combining different parts and moving them around with different operations to build up something more complex. So I'm still sort of just a beginner myself at the whole process of building these models. There's a ton of awesome tutorial videos of people going through these super quickly with all these keyboard shortcuts. The best way I found to learn sort of more advanced techniques is to watch those, and basically every time they do something, pause it, do it yourself, unpause it, because they go so quickly in a lot of these. They just like they're really good, but they go kind of quickly for actually absorbing the individual operations if you're a beginner. But seeing someone who has mastery is, I think, is a great way of learning and seeing sort of how they think about them. So I'm not going to go into that too deeply, frankly, because I'm not an expert. But so I'm going to be mainly using menu items instead of keyboard shortcuts, except for the super common operations. But just know that for pretty much anything that you can do, there's a keyboard shortcut to do it, and it'll show you what that is. So I was I'm gonna just sort of build a chair, like an armchair type thing, and sort of talk through how I'm going about doing that, and then you can either do that exactly or sort of play around more in a more exploratory way, however you want to do that. So from this, basically we need to do a couple things. One is obviously make this 3-dimensional. We need to add more detail, and so I'm just going to start using some of these tools that I use regularly. So first I'm going to shift into top view mode. So that's pressing 7. So right now we're looking flat down onto this plane. Then I'm going to take the knife, which is over here on the left. So the knife is like a super manual tool. It lets you just cut additional vertices, edges, faces into things. So the general idea I have is I'm going to make so this is looking top down. I'm going to make 2 arms here, a back here, and then I might do some extra fancy curving at the front. So basically I need sections to work with on the sides and back. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take the knife and cut. So I just left clicked on one edge, and you can see it sort of snaps, and left click again. And while you're in this knife mode, you can actually see they give you tips on the bottom here of different things to do. So for instance, C will constrain the angle. So if I press C, then it'll only do 90-degree and 45-degree cuts. That's based on how you're looking at it. So if you're in a weird rotation, that probably won't do what you expect. But that's one reason that it's nice to sort of be in this top view. So I'm just going to turn the angle constraint on, click C, and then I'm sort of in a weird state here. I can just keep clicking. And if you actually want to get out of this, you can see at the bottom it says new cut is E. So if you press E, you get out of that. So again, I'm just sort of slicing up this cube. There's a whole bunch of ways of doing exactly this. so the knife is actually not one of the more common ones, but I like it because it's like a super manual way you can see exactly what you're doing. So once we sort of get the cuts that we like, I'm going to hit enter, and that will actually perform the cut. So now you can see we actually have multiple individual faces that just got cut into the big face that we started with. So this is going to give us a little bit more stuff to work with. So right now I'm in face select mode, but I could have just as easily done that in vertex select or edge select. So we could take one of these vertices and move it, and you can see it actually moves all the faces and edges correspondingly. So 7 to get back to top view. So that's actually, I guess, enough to start. So now what we need to do is add some thickness to this. So I'm going to go back into face select mode, and I'm going to select. I'm going to start by selecting everything. So press A to select everything, and to add the thickness, we're going to use one of the most common tools, which is So there's sort of two places to find tools. One is here, just in the tools sidebar. Another one is in mesh. I haven't really figured out, so most of them are in both, but sometimes there are things that are only in one or the other. So in mesh, you can see everything that's related to edges, everything that's related to faces. So this is much more comprehensive, but most of the things we're looking for are just in the tools sidebar here. So actually what we're looking for is extrude. So we're going to extrude region, which is the normal extrude. You can also find that in mesh faces. I thought it was in here. It's extrude region. So everything that's in tools is also somewhere else, but usually the common ones are just in the main tools menu. So we're going to click extrude, and then you see we get this this line, and if you move your mouse, you can actually it creates a volume depending on how you move it. So this is once you get it sort of the thickness you like. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just getting sort of the base of the chair. So this is sort of going to be the seat height, and then I'm going to extrude other parts of this further up. So once we sort of get it, and this is all, you can obviously go back and reselect and move faces around, but I'm going to left click there to keep that. So now we got a cube, so that's pretty cool. I'm going to do that again with the edges. So then we're going to sort of make like a U shape that someone could sit in. So click extrude region, and again pull that up, and left click again to confirm that. So A will deselect if you have something selected, and if you press it when there's nothing selected, it'll select everything. So now we're just going to do one more. So now again, shift and then right click to select these faces, then I'm going to bring the back of the chair up a little bit more. So you might be tempted to just take the this arrow and drag it up. If you do that, you'll see it might actually be what you want. It's sort of, but it's not a real extrusion, because it's just taking the faces that you selected and moving them, and then transforming everything else around it to make it work. So that's sort of the difference between just a normal translation or movement and an extrusion. So as you do this more, you will sort of get the feel of what the tool is that will give you the effect or manipulation that you're looking for. It's just a matter of practice and learning, progressively learning more of these tools. So I'm starting with a very small subset that I think that they're sort of the one. It's honestly the ones that I sort of discovered or learned first. But there's a million ways to do pretty much anything, which is not always helpful for a beginner. Cool. So this is pretty cool. This kind of looks like a chair. It didn't take super long. Only used a couple of the tools. Used the knife and extrusion. So that's like a big part of of modeling is just sort of moving stuff around to get the effect you want. So if let's say we want to make this sort of just a little bit more asymmetrical or weird looking, I'm going to go back to the vertex selection, and then just maybe round these corners. So I'm going to right click and then shift to select multiple points, and then I can just drag these in. Maybe drag this down a little bit. So this is, there's real tools and operations to do this more automatically. But again, I feel like it feels a little bit more like sculpting. You're very tactile. So yeah, you can just sort of, if you take one, you can sort of see how you can make this look kind of however you want just by moving the individual vertices around once you have the general shape. So it's the whole modeling process, when you're doing something relatively simple, is just a matter of getting the geometry, meaning the vertices and edges and faces, to be sort of the right number of them and have them in approximately the right place, and then moving them around to look like what you want it to look like. Let's say we want to add legs. So there's a couple ways we could do that. We could do an extrusion again. So we could select, we already have these faces that are pretty much right where we would want legs, and we could extrude those the same way we did that, and they would turn into legs. But maybe we want to do something a little bit different. So let's say, let's say we want to make the legs more round. So how we're going to do that is we're going to actually create cylinders and then connect them to this. Or actually, we'll work our way through it. I had a plan, but I'm kind of improvising this as I go. So the first thing we want to do is actually just get rid of these faces. So we don't want them to be here because we're going to connect some other shape to them. So with the make sure you're in face select mode and select one or multiple of these, with shift again, and then press X to bring up the delete menu again. And this time we're gonna delete faces. So when we delete faces, it removes them and keeps everything else the way it was. Because we want to delete faces because we don't want the edges to go away because we need them for these other faces. And now you can kind of see inside the chair, and you can see it's a little bit dark as you rotate it in some orientations. That's because Blender has this concept of like the inside of a face and an outside of a face. So generally, you don't really need to worry about it that much, but there might be, if you do more complex manipulations, you might wind up with the inside of a face on the outside, and then there are ways of correcting that. But for now, we don't really care. So what we're going to do is we're going to make some circles, and then we're going to connect the circles to these holes, and those connections will be the legs, or sort of the same as doing the extrusion before. So I'm going to add a circle, and so yeah, it added all the way over here. So you might need to zoom out and find where it put that. So it actually put it on the 3D cursor. So as you get more proficient, you'll be more mindful of where the 3D cursor is, how to position things exactly where you want them. We're sort of just hacking at it, so we're going to be moving a lot of stuff manually. First thing to notice is that I can't select this or move it right now because it doesn't have a face, and I'm in face select mode. So I'm going to go to edge select, and then I should be able to move it. Oops. So see, I accidentally unselected the circle and got just one of the edges stuck to me. So I'm just going to hit escape to get out of that. And then I could either Control Z to get back to having it be selected. But let's say, so I'm going to hit A to deselect everything. Let's say we just want to select this circle. There's a couple ways of doing that. So this is, and being good at selecting exactly what you want to work with is one of the more difficult but also more powerful concepts to master in Blender. So one concept that I learned just when I was preparing for this, which is really cool, is you can select all of the parts that are linked to whatever you're hovering over. So everything in this circle is linked because they're all connected by edges, but they're not linked to the chair. So if I just want to select the circle, I can hover over it and press L, and it will select everything that's linked to whatever I'm hovering over. So if I deselect, hover over the chair, and press L, and you'll need to hover over an actual edge because we're in edge select mode. It'll select that. So A to deselect. We're going to go back and press L to select the circle again. So I'm again just sort of going by eye here. So this is obviously way too big to be the base of these legs. So I am going to scale this circle. So scale here will apply to whatever you have selected. So pretty much all of these is going to apply to whatever you have selected. So when I click scale, then we get into this manipulation mode where as you move the mouse, it changes the scale. And if, let's say you're getting close to the edge of the window, by default Blender does this cool thing where it'll just wrap around, so you can continuously scroll forever. So I think that's pretty nice.
Wait, where's scale?
Scale?
Yeah.
It should be at the top of tools under transform.
Oh.
So so by default it's going to be scaling in all X, Y, and Z directions by the same amount. There are ways of constraining it or typing in scale values manually. For now, again, we're just going to do this by eye. I'm just going to move this to be approximately how long I want them. So that's probably a good height for these legs. And then I'm going to actually press 7. So if I press 7, I go to the top view, but what I really want is the bottom view. So to get the opposite of all of these keyboard shortcuts, you can do Control and then press the number. So if I do Control 7, it'll flip to the bottom. And now we can be sure that when we're placing this circle, it's exactly where we want it to go. So that looks about right. Again, this is not, I'm not approaching this as CAD, so I don't care if this is all perfectly lined up or not. There are ways of actually doing that, but I'm not going to get into that. So now we need to connect this circle to this body. There's, again, many ways of doing that. So I'm going to first zoom in to get really close. So something that I probably should have fixed before going through this is this circle is very high resolution. So again, remember, Blender doesn't have a concept of curves, so everything is made up of straight lines. So I think by default the circle has, I think, 32 line segments, which is fine. It's not a problem, but it's, it probably would have looked about the same if we had 8 or 16 line segments. But that's fine. So the first thing we want to do now is to connect this circle to the base of the chair. So I went into vertex select mode because the way that we need to do that first is by selecting a vertex on each side and then making an edge between them. So I'm going to do that by selecting one vertex here, hold down Shift, right click to select this corner vertex. So then we should have exactly 2 vertices selected. And then if you press F, that's fill. So it's fill will, if you have 2 points selected, will put an edge between them. If you have more than 2, it will create a face. So first we're just going to get the very basic wireframe of this leg. So I'm going to rotate this a little bit. And again, I'm not being super precise about which one of these I'm connecting, but I'm going to select one over here, shift, right-click again to select the base of the chair one, press F to fill in a line. And let's say this one to this one, and press F. And then once more, right-click to select. And you might need to rotate to get an unobstructed view of of the vertices you're connecting. Shift, right-click, and F to fill that in. You can also go into Mesh. Where is it? Edges, make edge face. So that's, you can see that corresponds to F. So it will do it based on what you've punched in. So now this is close. So now we need to figure out what we want to do with sort of this circle to square transition. So I think what would be cool is if we sort of connect all of these points to one of these corners. So basically, as you transition, have a smooth transition from a round to a square shape. So basically, what I'm imagining is having this vertex connected to the same base corner, this vertex connected to the same base corner, and then at some point switch over so that this one will be connected to the next corner. So then we sort of have these triangles pointing up, and those triangles will eventually fill in with faces. Does that make sense? So we're basically just going to keep, again, there are automatic ways of doing all this that are a lot faster, but I kind of like this, repetition. First of all, just to sort of get comfortable with these tools and doing these sort of manipulations more quickly, and then also you can actually understand what the more complex operations are doing. Select. Basically, just keep doing the same thing. Select, shift again to select, multiple, right click, shift, F. So yes, this is very tedious and annoying, but I don't know, I kind of think of it as the like Karate Kid method of teaching. You sort of wax the car enough, and eventually you are a karate master. So you'll hopefully sort of get into the flow of this, and it'll start to feel a little bit more natural. Is everyone able to kind of do this? And I did make this more difficult than it needed to be by not reducing the edge count of the circle, but too bad. And cool. This is looking cool already. Yeah, well, you can always move the circle around after. So this is what I was talking about having like being good at selecting stuff. Like, if you can just select the circle, then you could continue scaling and moving it around. So that's actually, we should probably cover that. Right, if you don't have all of them connected, it'll still kind of work. Just might not be as pretty. So, so Andy, you mentioned wanting to maybe make this look a little more tapered or something like that. So we can actually do that. We can just select the circle and then do the same sort of scale translation stuff that we were doing before. So this is, again, you've got to just figure out the best way to select the circle. So of course you could just hold down Shift and select each of these points. There's a couple better ways of doing that though. So if you go into the Select menu, you can actually sort of see all of the different options that you have for selecting stuff. So there's probably the perfect one to do exactly what we want to do. I'm going to kind of use a more brute force approach, which is using a lasso select, which I, again, just discovered as I was preparing for this, this talk. So if you hold down Control and then drag with the left mouse button, you can actually freehand draw a shape. And so that freehand drawing is, again, projected from however you're looking at it. And it's kind of easy to accidentally select stuff behind it or have something that you want to select be obscured. So it's not a great tool, and I understand why they don't emphasize that in all these Blender tutorial videos, but it's a good sort of brute force way of selecting something. So if you weren't able to get a good selection, if maybe a point was missing or if you accidentally select something else, just try to kind of rotate it. Press A to deselect everything, and then again Control left drag to try again. And you can see it, so another thing is make sure that you're in vertex select mode. I guess edge select would yeah, I'm not sure if edge select would work because I think it would select these chords as well. So make sure you're in vertex select and then do that, and then you'd be just selecting these points. And you can make sure that you've done it right, because when you're in vertex selection, it'll sort of fade along the edge, so it's black closer to the unselected vertices and then orange on everything that's selected. So if I had accidentally selected this vertex as well, you can see that it doesn't fade to black. So yeah, Blender does some nice stuff like that to make it really clear what you have selected. So then once you have it selected, then it's super easy to scale it or move it. So we could just move this whole circle around. We could scale it and get even more of a taper or less. Could rotate it. You can do a whole bunch of stuff. So was everyone able to get the circle selected and move it around? So while we have it selected, we're going to do one more thing, which is add a face to the bottom. So just how we pressed F to create an edge with 2 vertices selected, if you have more than 2, it'll create a face. So if you press F, it will fill in just one big honking face with all these vertices. And that's pretty cool. Then, I think this should work. Once you've done that, we want to add faces to all these little guys too. So I think if we just select all of these, yeah, let's try that. So if you hold down Shift, again in vertex select mode, if you hold down Shift and then right click to select these 4 base points, if we press F, I think it'll be smart enough, yeah, to fill in each of those with their own individual faces. And then you can press A to deselect, and then just sort of to make sure that we did the right thing, you can go back into face select mode, and yeah, sure enough, each of these are their own little individual faces. And we have a pretty cool leg on the chair. Yeah, so you can see, we really only used a couple tools. We used the knife, extrusion, and fills, and then just a couple primitive objects and the normal, scaling and moving, and we were able to build this, which is, it's not, I wouldn't go and fabricate this as is, but that's pretty good for, just a couple of these tools. So you could obviously see how understanding and knowing how more of these tools work could speed up the process or sort of give you more flexibility in how you construct. But even with just a little bit of that understanding of the tools and the selection types, you can do some pretty powerful stuff. One other thing I want to talk about is modifiers, which are things that you apply to the mesh as a whole, and it can modify how it looks without you having to manually do whatever it's doing. So the one modifier that we have is a mirror modifier. So that means you can actually just build half of your object and it'll mirror to the other half. But that still wouldn't take care of the back to front thing. So what we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this leg once on the same side that it's on. So for my chair here, I'm going to duplicate this back leg and move it to the front leg. And then we're going to delete the other half of the chair and then use the mirror modifier to mirror the half that we worked on to the other half. So and then that'll probably be, we'll see where that takes us. So we're going to select this leg. So again, there's a million different ways of selecting stuff. I'm going to again sort of use I'll use the lasso tool. So from this view, I think I can actually hit all the faces at once. So hold down Shift, left, and just sort of draw and make sure you get on all the faces. And if you accidentally select an extra one, you can hold down Shift and right-click to unselect just that one. So this looks pretty good. And now we can duplicate this, and then we'll just need to stitch it into the other guy, and we'll go into how to do that. So we're going to go to Mesh. Let's see, is there one here? Oops. Duplicate. Cool. So it's in here. So just click Duplicate, and you see it sort of gives you a ghost of the mesh, and you can move it to roughly where you want it. And then just left click to get out of that mode, and it sticks where you put it. Now, before you do anything else, you can when you're in that sort of drag, manipulate mode, and you left click to finish it, you can actually go back. As soon as you left click to get out of that mode, it gives you these numerical parameters. So you can, if you wanted to, let's say we wanted to move it exactly minus 1.5 in the y direction, we could do that, and then it lets us continue modifying these. So we could use the numerical inputs for that as well. So actually, I guess I know that I don't want it to move in the x direction at all, because that's sort of would be coming toward me, and I know that they should be in the same x dimension, so I could actually just set this x to 0.
I'm sorry, quick question.
Yep.
A few steps behind you, where did you duplicate the object?
So once you have what you want to duplicate selected, you go in the Tools menu on the left. There's a duplicate. Under Add, there's a duplicate option. You see it there?
Yeah.
Cool. Even after you edit that drag mode, you can always sort of manually move it, just like you can move anything else with these arrow handles. So I'm going to leave a little bit of space here, and again, I'm not being super precise about the placement of any of this stuff. But basically what we want to do is merge these. We want to merge this edge with this edge, this vertex with this vertex, so they so they'll become one object. So we can, let's just do that one by one, because I'm sure I know how to do it that way. So once we get it sort of approximately where we want it, again, remember, once we merge them, we can always move the circle around just like we did before to get it more precise. So I'm going to press A to deselect, and then I'm going to go into vertex select mode. So the idea is just like how we were creating edges before. By selecting one vertex on each side, we're going to do the same thing, but then collapse them together. And that should do what we want. If not, then there's other tools at our disposal. So yeah, again, especially when you're getting started, there's a lot of just sort of, you know about one thing, so you try that. If it doesn't work, then you sort of just scan through the menu, see if there's something else that looks like it might do what you want, look at the documentation. So it's, and you just sort of slowly build up a repertoire of tools that you're comfortable using. So the more you do this, the more practice you get, the better, the faster you get, the easier it is. So you can sort of see I'm still sort of experimenting and figuring it out. So I'm going to select, Shift and then right-click to select the corresponding vertex that we want to merge together. So I know if we press X, there's a delete option called Dissolve Vertices. So I think if we do that, it'll dissolve them and move them to the midpoint and basically merge all them at the midpoint. That did not do what I expected, so I'm going to undo that. And I know that there's merge. There we go. This is what I was thinking of. So now we can actually we actually want to make sure that these vertices on the base of the chair don't move. So we want to basically move this vertex to where the other one is. So, and you can see under merge, so this is again in the tools under remove, there are a couple different options, at first, at last, at center. So when I see this, all I really know is that I want to be mindful of which of these vertices I'm selecting first. So if I select the base one and then the leg one, then I'll say merge at first. If I select the base one second, then I'll say merge at last. So right-click to select this one, Shift, right-click to select the leg vertex, and then I'm going to say merge at first. Hopefully that'll do what I want. Yay! So now we've started merging this duplicate in. Is everyone able to do this? Cool. So then we're just going to go around and do that on the other four, or the other three. So this time, I should be mindful of this. So first base, then leg, merge at first. First base, then leg, merge at first.
So does that elongate your leg?
Yeah. So you can see they're actually not. This guy's a little bit longer.
Yeah.
So yeah. So we could we can fix that just by moving this circle. We could select both of them and scale in the z direction to 0, which would we'll do that. But yes, you're right. These, because this wasn't positioned precisely, they're not in the same. They're uneven legs, and we'd have a wobbly chair. So base, then leg, merge at first. Cool. So great. We duplicated and stitched these together. And now let's take care of the wobbly legs. So the way we're going to do that is, now that we have these faces here, it's actually going to be a lot easier to select because we can just go into face select mode and then right-click on here, and we selected the whole thing instead of having to use the lasso like we did before. So I'm going to select both of these, both of the faces at the bottom of these legs, and so we want to make sure that nothing else is selected. And now we're going to use use a scaling trick to make sure that they're in the same position. So if you click scale and then just do the normal drag thing, you see it actually is like scaling all over the place, and that's not what we want. So I just escaped out of that. So I'm going to press scale and then just click, left click right away, which doesn't, which if you don't move the mouse, will just bring up this tool panel. And then, so this is it says resize here, even though it says scale up there. I don't know why. But now this is basically the numerical input for that scale operation. So what I'm going to tell it to do is to scale z to 0. And since z is this up down, it's basically going to, if you think about like a 3D rectangle that contains both of these, it has the thickness of that 3D box is what we want to compress to 0 so that they're the same, so they're at the same z position. So if we just if we say we want to scale z to 0 but leave x and y the same, then it'll sort of average the difference between the two legs and without changing the x and the y. So now we've got our two legs, and we want to, so we've made some sort of freehand changes. So like these are obviously not symmetrical. So we want to make sure that this chair is actually symmetrical. So I'm going to first just go to press 1 to get into the front view, get reoriented. And let's see, should I do this? Right, so we're going to use the modifier to mirror the right half of this chair onto the left half. So now, we're actually going to change from edit mode into object mode. So either down here or by pressing tab, go into object mode, and then you can kind of see that the lines for the edges go away. And we're going to make sure that we have, it's still called cube because that's what was originally in this mesh. Make sure we have that selected, and here in this toolbar, click on the wrench, which is object modifiers. So object modifiers are really cool. They're basically non-destructive effects that you can apply to your object, and then you can, in edit mode, continue editing the underlying mesh. So we're going to do a mirror modifier, and well, that's close, but you can see it's not exactly what we want, but that's okay. So we want to mirror over the x-axis. So that's actually the correct axis that we want to mirror over. And it's, okay, I see. So it's mirroring around something that we don't want it to mirror around. So I think it's mirroring around this point, which is considered the origin of the object. So that's good to know. So what we are, so what we want to do is make sure that the origin of the object is somewhere more sane, because that's the point that we're going to use. So we can actually, I'm going to remove this modifier, make sure we have right-click to make sure that the chair thing is selected, and we can say set origin, say origin to geometry, and let's see where that puts it. So I think that's, I'm not sure how it decides that. That looks okay. We can actually be more precise and use the 3D cursor. So we want the origin to be about in the middle of the chair, and so we can use the 3D cursor to actually point it where we want it. So if you left click, you move the 3D cursor, and we're going to say that this is the origin of our chair. And the only reason we care about this is just that the mirroring will be done correctly. So once we do that, then we can say origin to 3D cursor, and now the origin is moved right there, and the mirror should do closer to what we expect it to do. So I actually didn't need to remove the modifier to do this, but I just thought it would be easier to see what was going on. So I'm here, I'm going to go back to, in the wrench menu, add modifier, mirror. So now it's actually pretty close, but you see they're actually overlapping. So it didn't remove the side that we don't want. So if we, let's see. So if you click this eye, you can toggle whether it's the modification is displayed. So you can see it's not actually removing what was originally on the left side. It's just also adding a duplicate across both sides. So we actually need to delete this half of the chair so that it'll only be on this side of the origin and then be mirrored correctly. And then we'll worry about stitching it together. So we're going to go back into edit mode so that we can remove half of the chair. Edit mode. Now we're going to use one of my favorite tools, which is called the loop cut. So the loop cut is just like the knife that we were using to manually cut the faces, but it does a whole loop around the object in one go. So on the left here, you see loop cut and slide. So I'm going to select this, and then if you just hover over your object, you see it draws in purple or magenta these different possible loops that you could cut. So so you can sort of play around with that for a second just to see what it would let you do. But we want this one. There it goes. So basically, we want to do this cut so that then we can select half, the left half, and delete it. So I'm going to left click once, and then it actually lets us slide it to a different position. It doesn't need to be precise, but I'm going to make sure to cut it to the right of the origin. So this yellow or orange dot is the origin. And the reason I'm doing that is just so that I can be sure that it's not going to overlap. And we basically just have a small version of the same problem that we had before where the mirror overlapped. So I want to make sure that we're going to have a gap between the real side and the mirrored side of the chair. So left click again, places that. And then I think we can actually, okay, no, I thought we could actually delete right from here, but it's a separate operation. So now try not to deselect anything, because this is actually a really useful selection, because we basically just want to delete everything to the left of this loop of edges. So I think there's probably a way to change the selection to do that. So I'm going to go to select, and we basically want to select this plus everything to the left of it. So we could always do it manually, just selecting all these faces. I'm trying to think of something a little bit more clever, but we might just fall back to that. Yeah, let's just do that. So we can go into face select mode, and then it shouldn't take too long. Just hold down Shift and right click to select all the faces on half of the chair. So again, as you get more experience with Blender, you'll sort of learn better techniques for doing stuff like this. The important thing is that there's always a brute force way to do about what you want. Forgot to. Great. So we've done that, and we can press X to bring up the delete menu again, and say to delete faces. And that's exactly what we want. So now we have about half of a chair. Now we can, so if you haven't deleted your modifier, you could actually add it back in right now. So if you click the eye, you can display modifier in viewport, and we can actually see, even in edit mode, we can see the real half and as well as the reflected half of this chair. We have a gap, which we'll get to in a second, but this is fairly close to what we want. Has everyone gotten to this point?
When you deleted the side, did you
I
do
I
faces?
I did faces. I think you could do faces or edges. No, I think just do faces. Because if you do edges, then it would also take away this line of edges, which we want.
That looks like it takes away the points, the vertices too, when you say faces. I don't see anything out there.
Well,
So,
oh,
yeah,
you mean
that's
you
what
mean
I
you mean the
wanted.
yes, yeah.
Yes,
So
on
basically,
those faces,
it'll
it got it.
so there that yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
point.
makes
So if you you can actually see there is delete faces and then delete only faces. So delete faces will also delete anything that would be orphaned if
Okay.
after deleting the
Okay.
faces.
All
If
right.
you actually wanted all those vertices hanging out there, you could say delete only edges and faces or only faces. Usually that's not what you want though. But yes, good point. All right. So now we've got two halves of a chair. We just need to connect them. So has everyone gotten to the this reflection part? Cool. So the mirror modifier has one very unintuitively named option called clipping. So clipping says prevent vertices from going through the mirror during transform. What it really does is it will, if there's a vertex exactly on the mirror plane, it will merge it with the mirror image version of itself automatically. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to enable clipping, and then we're going to drag all of these points that are on the edge into the mirror surface, thereby fusing them with the mirrored half of the object. So that it'll become clear when we actually do it. So first I'm going to do it with one point so you can kind of see what the effect is with clipping versus without clipping. So I'm going to go to, I'll do edge select actually. So I'm going into edge select mode, and first I'm going to disable clipping. And then I'm going to zoom in and select just this front edge. So without clipping, if I move it into the mirror, it'll just continue going, and the mirror copy will likewise go into the side that we think of as the real half. So this is not useful. What we do if we turn on clipping and do the same thing, then once they touch, they'll stop. And then once I release, they'll actually fuse, and I can't pull it back out. So that's exactly what we want. So this is effectively how you turn two mirror image objects into a single symmetrical object. So I'm going to undo that just so I can Control Z a couple times. And then I'm just going to select all the edges and do that. I just undid so it would be easier to get at these inside ones. So again, there are lots of tricks for selecting an edge loop like this more efficiently, but if you just hold down Shift, you can do it manually. So once we get the whole loop selected, make sure clipping is turned on, and then just drag in this one direction, release when they hit each other, and then they should be locked. So yeah, so now we could do something like taking this, this guy and maybe flaring it out, and you can see it's happening in the mirror side as well as the real side.
How do you switch to select an edge when you're in this mode?
Well, the mode is the same. We're still in edit mode. It's just that we have a modifier added. So sometimes it's actually better to not see. You just want to see the mesh that you're working with and not the modified mesh. So there are actually different options up here for how to display it. So display modifier in edit mode. If we turn that off, then we only see the real half. But then if we go from edit mode to object mode, then we see the modified version. So depending on how you like to work, or you might prefer some of these different options, but yeah, this is the main one that's good to know about. It's the display and edit mode.
Is there a way that you were controlling the axis in which you were dragging the?
Yeah. So yeah. So if yeah. So you want to make sure that you select the arrow. So when you select an object, you want to make sure to select. If you select the arrow in the direction you want to move it, it'll be constrained. So even if I try to drag it up and down, it won't drag. So that's a useful one to know. So the last thing is another really cool modifier called subsurface, or where is it? Subdivision surface. So a lot of times people just call it subsurface. So this is a way of smoothing the object that you've created by basically automatically adding more faces. So you can see right away it looks really cool and blobby and organic. You kind of need to learn how, like, you kind of get the feel of how it responds to the underlying mesh. But basically, it doesn't really have many options. The only one that I would really recommend changing is this view one. And render actually, but that we don't really render things. We're just building models. So if you increase that, it'll actually increase the number of polygons that it's subdividing into. If you set it too high, it starts to go really slowly. So 2 or 3 is probably a good number to keep it at. So so this is a good way of turning like a really basic, low polygon model into something that's a little bit more curved and organic looking. Is everyone able to get that looking correct?
And you really could just now select, if you zoomed in enough, you could select these individual faces and go to town, right?
No. So since this is a modifier, what that means is in edit mode, we're still just editing the underlying mesh, and so we can't actually select these individual faces. If you wanted to, then what you'd have to do what's called applying the modifier. So if you click apply here, then it'll actually create a new object that's the calculated mesh.
Then you lose the old skeleton.
Yeah. So they don't. Yeah. So it's basically a one. So it's like in Photoshop or other in other creative tools, there's this concept of destructive versus non-destructive editing. So modifiers are non-destructive, meaning you can still change what's underneath them. But once you apply it, that's a destructive operation. So then you can't go back once you do that. So generally, the workflow. So for instance, so I built this table basically using a subsurface modifier to turn the low polygon into a high polygon organic shape. So I did everything using the low polygon one, and then when I thought it looked right, then I would hit apply and then use that to feed it to export the model, sort of as the final step. So generally, you're not going to apply these until you're done. Another thing is the order of these modifiers is important. So they get applied from top to bottom. So it gets mirrored, and then the mirror object gets the subsurf. If you reverse it, then you can see what would happen is it'll do the subsurf, and then it'll mirror it, but it'll be too late. After the subsurf, it'll be smoothed away from the edge of the mirror. So it should, or maybe with clipping, it actually does the right thing. Yeah. So maybe in this case it in this case it actually looks the same, but in general, if it doesn't look how you think it should look, try using these up down arrows to change the order that the modifiers are applied. That's sort of a more advanced thing that probably wouldn't run into unless you were using a lot of different modifiers, which I don't really do, but sometimes that happens. So then the last thing about the about subsurf is there's a way of actually controlling the blobbiness of it, I guess. So let's say we actually want like a nice crease at the back of the chair instead of it being rounded like this. We can actually tell it how much to smooth. So first I'm going to unselect display in edit mode just so I can select this edge that kind of gets hidden otherwise. And because I want to do something to that, just to that one edge. And then I'm going to turn it back on so I can see what I'm doing, but that edge is still selected. It's just sort of hidden by the subsurf. Then I'm going to, under the mesh menu, I'm going to go to edges, edge crease. So the edge crease is a value between -1 and 1. By default, it's 0, but 1 means that the subsurf will keep it 100% creased, and 0 is basically what it's doing now. So if I click edge crease, it's gonna we can change what the crease is on this on that edge, and so it's the same sort of thing where you move the mouse and you can sort of see how it you can change the crease of the subsurf. So and it shows you in the it's hard to do. I can't point while in this mode, but you can see in the bottom left corner it shows what the crease value is. So it maxes out at 1. I'm gonna maybe take it down to 0.7 or so.
I'm sorry, where was the crease again?
It's under when you have an edge selected, you go to mesh, edges, edge crease. It's also Shift E, but I don't use it enough to remember the shortcut. So that's something if you don't have the subsurf displayed in edit mode, you can actually see it kind of color codes the creases, so you can see where you've applied creases in the past. And I think there's a way to sort of reset everything back to 0 or do other sort of more batch operations. But that's a good one because the subsurf is kind of finicky, and a lot of times, especially with very low resolution meshes like this, it doesn't necessarily do what you expect it to do. So it's good to have that extra control. Another thing you could do is actually just add more edges. So if we just added an edge here and an edge here, that effectively sort of weights it more, and the subsurf isn't going to modify it as much because you've defined more shape already by yourself. So just turn that back on. So yeah, you were asking about actually being able to modify this. If I hit apply here, modifiers cannot be applied in edit mode. Okay, so hit tab to go back to object mode, apply, and applied modifier was not first, might not be as expected. So it actually, so I thought it duplicated, it actually doesn't. So now I've just, so what we probably would want to do is right click and I thought it was here. Oh, it's over here. Duplicate, and I'll just put it here. And then I'm going to take this new guy, and they tell you to apply modifiers from top to bottom. So basically, it's just in case something weird would happen if it didn't apply in the correct order. So I'm going to apply the mirror. So now if I open this one in edit mode, you can see I can actually edit both sides, but I haven't yet applied the subsurf. So if I wanted to make it asymmetrical, I could now, because just in this copy, because I applied the mirror modifier. Go back into object mode, and if I apply the subsurf now if I hit tab to go into edit mode again, you can see it is actually, that's the mesh that we have to edit with now. Not as useful for, especially if you're doing manual selection of things. So yeah, that's sort of what I wanted to cover today. The like from here, obviously you would save this as a Blender file. You can also export it to like an STL, which you can load into like Slicer for the 3D printers. So you could actually take this and 3D print it right now if you wanted to. Yeah, any questions about this stuff?
Well, speaking of printing this, does Slicer then handle the hollowing out? Okay.
Yeah, so I'm actually not super, I haven't done a ton of 3D printing, but I know that's part of, so Slicer expects a manifold object, which basically means, remember when we like when we cut holes, in this, like if I delete these faces, Slicer would probably freak out over that because it doesn't know what the inside and what the outside is. So as long as you have what's called a manifold object, which is that it's a full shell, Slicer can then do all the stuff that it does for hollowing and struts and things like that.